Yes, good morning and welcome. You're indeed watching Citizen TV. This is Power Breakfast. My name is Fred Indumuli. It's the time when we take a look at the headlines this morning. Just before this, of course, very beautiful music. Carlos Kiban, the band, will continue enjoying that musical treat throughout the show. Remember, the hashtag to use for the next 2.5 hours or so is hashtag Power Breakfast. You can also tweet us at Citizen TV Kenya. My Twitter handle is at Fred Indumuli. Let's get talking. This morning, we're privileged to have two honorable members of the National Assembly, that's Francis Waititu, MP Juja, and Anthony Oluoch, MP Mathare constituency. Also in studio, we're privileged to have Joy Mdiva, political analyst. Good morning, na karibuni sana. A quick look at the headlines this morning. Of course, politics takes center stage. The U.S. pushes for Raila Uhuru talks over poll. And they're saying if our largest embassy is in Nairobi, Kenya, that means we have a stake in that country, and Africa has a stake too. That's Donald Yamamoto, a U.S. diplomat for African affairs. On the Standard, Big Two adamant as a tough week begins. Locking horns hours to Maraga's full ruling on annulment of Uhuru's win. Raila launches campaign to remove 12 IEBC officials. Or there will be no October 17th election. Ruto maintains polling take place, barring plot for a coup or violence. Of course, this makes for the biggest discussions this morning. But a quick look at the other headlines just to mention what else is on the daily this morning. Of course, highlighted on the front page of the Daily Nation, policeman accused of killing lover. A policeman is accused of shooting dead his 23-year-old lover after she turned down his marriage proposal. Now, this happened within the city center here in Nairobi. That story is also on the Standard, on the inside pages of the Standard, and it's a very interesting story because the shooting happened at a cyber cafe along Tomboya Street here in Nairobi. That's just one of the headlines, and apparently the officer is attached to the presidential escort units. The other big story, of course, especially for city dwellers, is the ban on matatus from entering the CBD. That story is on page 19 of the Standard. It's highlighted on the front page. Sonko vows to get city matatus out of CBD. Hundreds of traffic marshals to be deployed to enforce a ban stopping all public service vehicles from accessing the central business district. The story is on page 19 of the Standard, and this will mean quite a lot of changes to commuters in Nairobi. City to hire 1,000 traffic marshals to effect matatu ban. Governor Sonko says the ban is a temporary measure before the county embarks on permanent solutions to decongest the city. Of course, there are about 30,000 matatus. That story is on page 19. You can read it. For city dwellers, of course, that's very interesting. The other very interesting story, and probably we'll start with this before we get to the politics. Some special reports on the Standard. Kenyans are moved by new customary marriage law. Kenyans appear reluctant to register their customary marriages, going by the low figures since the legal requirements came into force. That's highlighted on the front page of the Standard. The story is on page 4 and 5. It's a very interesting special report. Now, this new law came into force on August 1st. More than 7 weeks later, only 28 couples have registered their customary marriages and acquired certificates. 7 weeks later, only 28. Although there have been more than 600 inquiries made to the Office of the Registrar of Marriages since the new law requiring couples to register their customary unions. Wow. We're privileged this morning to have at least two lawyers who it would be interesting to get their input on this. Let's start with you, Joy. Very good morning, karibu sana.
Morning, Fred.
This is a very interesting law, of course, and probably we just did not understand how important this is. 28 couples only, more than 7 weeks later. It means probably we still do not see the reason why customary unions should have certificates.
Most definitely. Remember, this law was put in place so that we can get rid of, this habit that people had of when we turn up at the funeral, then somebody else stands up also with a net around her neck and children ambling along, claiming that they are also a wife. So now it made it such that even if you have got 7 wives, each wife can get a separate certificate from the date when the marriage was contracted. So it's not a punitive law, as maybe people are thinking somebody wants to dissolve your marriages. No, it's actually meant to protect all the spouses in a polygamous union. So because most customary marriages are polygamous, and even for those that are not polygamous, it gives you the status of a wife. If you've been in a home for 20 years, surely you need to get the proper status in law as a wife as you get customarily. So it's one of those things that I think more civic education is needed, and it's dismal that the uptake is so low. Maybe they need to also decentralize it. I know there are plans to have regional registrars. So that is something for, I think the politics has overtaken everything. We need to come back to bread and butter issues.
And of course, even the day the law came into force was just about a week to the August 8th election, and of course no one really concentrated on anything else at that time. But you mentioned something about skepticism, this kind of fear that people have, that probably you want to give us certificates because with ulterior motives. And Antonio Loach, you're also a lawyer, I probably understand some of these things. Some of these laws, especially to do with the families, especially to do with things, because we love legislation as Kenyans. We love legislation around plastic bags, around how IEBC, political parties will work. But when it comes to this very personal things, we are very scared of the law.
Yeah, that's true. Look, I think if you're going to have a polygamous marriage or people into your lives, it's only important that you have full disclosure. I think this law is important not just for the wives or wife, like she said, people showing up at funerals. You need to be able to have full disclosure, not just to your children, that look, I have one wife, or I have two wives, I have three, I have 10. If you have 10 wives, just feel comfortable to have them all covered so that everybody does know that these are people surrounding your life. And it gives a sense of security, which I think is important for everybody in the family. On another note, I think I would say that part of the skepticism has to do with the lack of civic education. I think there's a lot to be done, that it cannot be a bad thing that people have a certificate, so that the process of succession, the process of devolution of property, you do not have situations of people fighting each other if somebody has passed on. So I think those are the two things that stick out to me.
And Bwana Francis Waititu, MP Juja, of course, even for our political view, we tend to do a lot more politicking, and this year is designed especially for that. We're going to continue politicking until next year, I'm sure. But it's very interesting that such laws are in existence, but Kenyans are reluctant to even embrace such things, which are very key to their lives. Even as a member of parliament for Juja, I know it may not really fall under your jurisdiction to try and tell people what to do with their marriages, but this is part of the problem. You attend funerals and harambees where people would have been otherwise comfortable, but because of one or two things, the marriages were not probably protected by law, then there's a problem.
First, I want to thank the people of Juja for my re-election. And again, this is something I also have been doing in my constituency, because every Monday I'm in that office. And looking at what, before we broke up in the 11th Parliament for elections, it is true that we had a debate and we were trying to see how good it can fit Kenyans, because when you look at the districts, we have DCCs who take up that matter, and that is why we were also saying, and the chiefs and sub-chiefs and who are now representing the government should actually get involved so that they teach our people, because some actually don't know how the law has covered them, and that is why you find them like getting scared to go and register, and the law has covered them, but going to register is a problem. But what he has said, customary laws and all are covered by our new constitution. So whatever you want, whether you have 2 wives or 3 wives, or what happens in the Christianity or Muslim, that also is covered. So I think even now we are going to change some that were left hanging.
Yes, and if I may, there's something else I think we need to take into account here. You see, some time back we changed our law of succession. To state that, for purposes of succession, children include even illegitimate children. But I think something was left behind of wives and otherwise. So if you have, I don't want to call them illegitimate wives, but by extension, if you're going to have children covered in your marriage and children outside your marriage, I think it is only proper that we also cover these other wives, and this issue of registration of these comes well within that meaning.
Yeah, of course, the National Assembly has on occasion had the opportunity to try and legislate on some of these things. I'm talking about the issues of the Marriage Act, a few changes on even property, and who should take care of who after divorce. It's very interesting because this legislation, even when it gets to Parliament, even parliamentarians are a bit hesitant to handle some of these things. The skepticism is not just from the general public.
It really affects people.
Yes, but
yeah, it's true, because even when we had that debate, even the speaker himself, you know, it was a lot of there was a lot of confusion, and definitely we were following the law that was there, but we tried to amend so many of them. But the lawyer here has clearly said, Mheshimiwa from Madare here, I think he followed it because it was not easy. You saw what happened, and that is why we left it. Now for us to go back again, I'm happy. Most of them, these are the people we depended so much on, the lawyers who are in Parliament, and even now there will be many there to guide us so that we put the right laws so that it fits people. Because at the end of the day, when a father passes on, the children, some children are into problems, you know, even school fees and others, it affects them. And because they are your children, there must be a law that covers them.
Of course, the page 4 and 5 of the Standard is trying to cover this story. There's also a headline there where they say when the law is unfair. The headline reads, "Why you may urgently need that marriage certificate." And just the first paragraph, 2 judges have ruled that living with a person and having a child together is not proof of marriage. Now, of course, there's a lot of confusion, Joy Mdivo. There's a lot of confusion because at some point we're told if you cohabit with someone for 6 months, then it's considered a marriage. Yes. Now things are changing. 2 judges have actually ruled that living with a person and having a child together is not proof of marriage. Where are we on this?
What we had before, we had something called presumption of marriage. That was under customary. It was under just, you know, common law practice, where if you live with a woman long enough and you put yourselves out as a man and wife, then people will presume that you are married. But what we discovered was that men and some women were capable of conducting several homes in several towns convincingly
at the same time,
and everybody thought that they were the only ones until in the third occasion of a demise. So what has happened is that the parliamentarians in their wisdom took all the marriage laws and consolidated them into one marriage act. And in that one marriage act, they said, look, it does not matter what system of marriage you choose to employ. What you have to do, you have to tell the government that you're married, and the government gives you a certificate for it. Now, all those women who are in presumptive marriages, where you're assuming that you're married, but you do not have a marriage certificate, all you are is friends with benefits. Because at the end of the day, it is not pictures in Uhuru Park, it is not I changed the name on my ID, it's not I have children that is proof of marriage, it's that certificate. And women, especially women, we need to understand the promise of tomorrow cannot really suffice. Before it used to be you can prove presumption, but now there's no presumption. Is do you have a certificate or not? So especially if you're starting your cohabitation after August 2017, even if you stay for 20 years, there will be no defense of, because now the law recognizes that there are people who intend to cohabit but have no intention of giving themselves the status of husband and wife for whatever reason. You don't want to have that title, you don't want issues with succession. Maybe I just want the comfort of a man, but I don't want to be shackled with all his traditions and his. So it even gives people the liberty to cohabit and not be married. So if you want to be married, go ahead and get a certificate.
Because even
if you want to be married, stay.
Even discussing this issue with even colleagues, there seems to be a lot of misinformation and misunderstanding. And thank you, Joy, for that clarification that actually all these laws were collapsed into one, into the Marriage Act, because people still talk about cohabiting, and if you present yourself, as you said, as a married couple, even if you don't have a certificate, then the law will presume that you are married.
There's no more presumption, it's either or.
Yes, it's either or. But this kind of misinformation, Anthony will watch, how do we approach it? Because now this is a problem. There's a lot of misunderstanding, misinformation within the public. This talks about the core of the society, the family unit. If at all we do not understand what it means to have a proper protection for the family unit, then even this big political discussions we're having are heading nowhere.
Yeah, I started by talking about this in two perspectives. One was about the need for public education. I think family and custom are one of those things that people tend to hold on to in terms of this is my tradition, this is where I come from. It will take some time, so I do hope that the Marriage Act itself took into account that this is something that has to be realized, I think, progressively, so that even though, as she says, it is no longer a defense to say, look, I have a traditional marriage, and the law now says you must have a certificate. The law, I think, ought to take into account that people who contracted marriages or cohabited over time before the enactment of this law will need time to get into the system, and the government has an obligation, I think, to carry out public participation and awareness.
Of course, it should be noted that even the registrar has stopped quite a number of couples from getting certificates, especially those who are simply cohabiting and not just being given certificates. And they're saying here, and I quote, "We are not registering those cohabiting. Customs must have been performed, which involves a family's meeting and some exchanges done." Yeah,
that is true.
There is quite a lot, and I think this is one of those headlines that every Kenyan should read and understand, every young Kenyan or every Kenyan who is in any marriage of some sort. Yes, time now for a break. When we come back, we discuss the politics as well. I'll be giving the re-elected and newly elected members of the National Assembly an opportunity to also make their introductory remarks before we delve into the politics, because this is the first time since election and re-election respectively on this panel, but that's after the break.